everybody, this is Garrett with Earth and Time, and today I'm going to a stop that I wanted to go to for a while. I'm in Brenham, Texas, about an hour and a half northwest outside of Houston, Texas, along Highway 290. And in Brenham, they have this heritage museum, which I've tried coming to time and time again, and it's open today. So come join me today. Let's check out the Brenham Heritage Museum and check out a little bit about this historic town, Brenham, Texas. Let's get to it. Okay, I've entered inside of the Brenham Heritage Museum, which I'm so excited about. I've tried coming to this museum so many times and I'm always here when they're closed. So this museum sits within an old post office, and check out the old tile. And I just learned they have these old post office boxes here, and you can even open these up. Can't go very far, but it's fun. You can sit here and open these up. It'd be fun for a kid just to play with, or a big kid like myself. Oh wait, there's like a little TV in there or something. That's cool. Oh, there's pictures. Oh, look at that. There's stuff inside of these. Oh, awesome. And that's a picture of, oh, you don't want to see me in a mirror. That's not good. All right. Oh, look at that. Oh, this is amazing. Okay. It's going to take me way too long to sit here and go through all of these. If you come here, come to these little P.O. boxes here, or these little post office boxes, and take a look at the dioramas that are inside of these. So if you come to the museum, it's $5 for an adult, and children 12 and under are free. So it was recommended that we take a look at the photography room first, although I got squirreled by the post office boxes. So let's go take a look at this photography. And the photographs go way back. And apparently this gentleman, F.C. Winkleman, who came to the U.S. around 1890, took a lot of pictures which recorded the history of what life was like in early Brenham, and really captured a lot of what life was like in the early 20th century. Here are a whole series of those photographs that they've put up in this display. And look at all these different cameras from all different vintages, from Polaroids to the old Kodaks, working our way down. Whoa, look at the size of that flash. To even the old box style cameras down below. And they actually have a little movie playing of Charlie Chaplin. From the photography room, we end up coming into a big central section where we can see a tractor. So agriculture really is kind of king of this area. Now there are railroads that came through here, and I think that really helped develop this region as well. But there's a lot of farmland and ranch land around here. And what kind of things did they grow? Well, they grew corn, cotton, pecans, or pecans, depending on where you're from, and then hay. So I caught the museum, I think, in flux here. It looks like they're getting ready to put in a sports section. So there's a number of famous, specifically baseball players that came out of this area. This section of Texas has a really rich baseball history, and it looks like they're working on redoing the whole museum to talk about other events that occurred or that took place here within Brenham and the greater area known as Washington County, which Brenham is the county seat for. One thing that's central here is transportation. And so here's an old railroad track. They actually brought in a spur into this area, which helped Brenham boom back in the 1800s. But they had other ways to get around in this area as well, like buggy. That's a really cool old horse-drawn buggy. And this little chest here actually talks more about the railroad. So the Houston, Texas Central Railroad came northwest from Houston into the fertile Brazos Valley. So that's the area we're in here. And they completed the railway in 1861. So they completed the railway just before the start of the Civil War, which meant that although they had the railway coming in here, cotton way of life here was going to drastically change in just a few short years here in the Brenham area. And here's some of that cotton. So this was a cotton growing region, and there are old plantations that surrounded the town of Brenham. Here's some articles from living here, kind of that turn of the century, where we can see things like a violin, plate, old phone. Check that out. Hello? 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 Now, one of my favorite things about living in Texas is the food. And one of the types of food that came here with the Czechs, there's a large population of Czechoslovakians, Polish immigrants, and German immigrants that came in to the central portion of Texas. And with that, they brought a number of types of foods, and you get an idea of some of their articles of clothing and games and other things they brought with them. But by far the best thing they brought were kolaches, which are one of my favorite breakfast foods, and one we really only find here in Texas, as far as I know, other than maybe over in Czechoslovakia. Like so many other places, Brenham had a number of individuals that served in a number of the wars here, going all the way back to really the Texas War for Independence, but more recently, World War I and World War II. And they have some nice articles and some history talking about the individuals that served here, including women who served in World War I as part of the Red Cross. And I do apologize for the glare. I know it's a little tough to see all these, but they actually have some World War I gas masks in here. They have a helmet from Vietnam. It's got an old peace sign on it. They have an old naval cap, a couple Navy caps, and then they actually have a souvenir pickle hob helmet from World War I that somebody brought back with them after serving during the war. So along with all the individuals that came from Europe, a tradition came over with them known as Mayfest. And every year they have a large Mayfest parade. They have floats, they have royalty. It's actually a pretty fun event. I've come to that before. Maybe someday I'll film that for you all. Okay, I'll take one more spin looking at what's in the mailboxes before I go on to the next thing. Oh, that's cool. Oh, that's fun. Let's see if we can find a good one. Let's find a good one here. Ooh, look at that one. That's cool. All right, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Now, unfortunately, the museum is going through some renovations, so it seems like they didn't have all their exhibits out, but I still thought it was really interesting. I enjoyed walking around, seeing some of the old items. And speaking of old items, just next door to the Heritage Museum is an old firehouse, Brenham number 1, and they have an 1879 Silsby steam fire engine in here that you can see would have been a horse-drawn fire engine. It would have had water in the tank in there, and it looks like they actually have a museum here. However, just my luck, it is closed, but we can see the old fire engine in there, and you can see they have a bunch of information about firefighting here in Brenham, Texas. And most important, they have their Dalmatian. So if anybody comes here and wants to go look at the Firefighter Museum here in Brenham, Texas, it's open Saturdays from 11 to 2. When I first moved to Houston, 17 years ago or so, Brenham was one of the first small Texas towns I ever went to visit, and I fell in love with it immediately. It has a lot of charm, the people are fantastic, and because I'm a big history buff, it has a lot of local history, including this is the county where they signed the Texas Declaration of Independence at Washington on the Brazos. They've also taken time to really create a lot of personality, a lot of art along the edges of these buildings, and really capture what life was like back in the mid to late 1800s into the early 20th century or early 1900s. Here's their Art Deco courthouse. So being that's Art Deco, I'm guessing it was built in the 1930s, maybe the 1920s, but it has that classic Art Deco style. Including even the little ornate eagle feature there, the straight lines, the black and silver. It really was in the 1920s and 30s a sign of coming to the modern age and really of wealth as well to have these Art Deco buildings. Okay, I was a little bit off on my timing for the Washington County Courthouse. It was actually built in 1940. I was guessing 1920s or 30s based on... Oh, and we have a fire truck, folks. So we've got a bunch of fire trucks. I hope everything's okay. Oh. That was exciting. Okay, take two. So I was a little bit wrong on this. I thought it was built in the 1920s, 30s based on this Art Deco style, but it was actually built in the 1940s. And I will say, I think Art Deco is my favorite architectural style right now. There's actually a famous Art Deco architect in the greater Houston area known as Joseph Fingers, who actually designed a number of the classic and famous 1920s, 30s buildings around the Houston area as well. And someday I hope to be able to take you all on a tour of all those architectural masterpieces. Many of the towns here in Texas have a central hub, which is where the courthouse is, and then they'll have things like this. They have a gazebo, and if I pan around, this is the square, which is really the center of activity within the town. Now, today there's a lot of boutique stores, a lot of great restaurants, and some fantastic places to stay, including the Ant Street Inn, which is a fantastic bed and breakfast I've stayed at before. In fact, I believe this was the room we stayed in, and it actually has an old freight elevator in the middle of the room because this was an old warehouse that was built in the 1800s. As I work my way over here, I actually talk a little bit more about this building. It was a business in 1880, and it was the Schmid Brothers building. And just to give you an idea about what this looks like, it's a beautiful hotel and bed and breakfast that you can come stay at with a restaurant. And inside this old building, they have the old vault, which they've actually made into a little mini gift shop. Pretty unique place to come grab gifts for people. And of course, lots of great Texas themed gifts. Here's a look at what the inside of this building used to look like. It was a big mercantile and grocery store. And here's some pictures from the outside. So that's where it says Ant Street Inn now across it we saw earlier. And here's a picture from the turn of the 20th century or 1900. One fun activity to come do here is to go look at all the murals. So there are these murals, beautiful piece of art everywhere. This is kind of a central Brenham flavor all its own, talking about what's here, like the baseball capital of Texas. It's also known as the birthplace of Texas. And of course, this is where every Texan's favorite ice cream comes from, and that's Bluebell ice cream. And I hope to be able to take you all on a tour one of these days. My favorite sandwich shop and favorite haunt when I come here to grab food is actually this restaurant called Must Be Heaven, and I'll just plug it. They're actually closed. They're only open 11 to 3, and it's after 3 o'clock now. But if you do come here, it has this old diner style to it, and it's very quirky, and it's a lot of fun, and they make really, really, really good sandwiches. And if you can see inside, it kind of has that old soda fountain, old diner style. And it's definitely worth a stop if you're passing through Brenham. In fact, it says this building was built in 1887. And there was also a tire store here that was actually owned by the mayor of Brenham. Interesting. As I'm walking up here, you can see another one of these murals. And I really like this one of the bear and the girl, and it's very, reminds me of kind of the pulp fiction style or pulp comic style artistry. And as I look around, you can see a bunch of artwork, including space armadillos and flowers and cats and birds on all of these areas. And of course, it wouldn't be Texas if we didn't have a cowgirl or cowboy, and they actually have Blind Willie Johnson, who was, I believe, a really famous blues singer, and he may have come from this area. There's actually a number of fairly well-known blues singers that came from this greater area of Texas. If you want to learn a little bit more about history and you don't want to go into the museum, they actually have this park, and it's known as Tobin Park, and they have a bunch of markers that talk about life in Brenham. It really is a nice park, and it's not just that. As many of you know, I'm also a geologist, and I'm always fascinated by things that have to do with earth and earth science. Well, one of the things that have to do with earth and earth science is water, right? And so they actually had a series of cisterns here that would hold water for the citizens. And actually one of these cisterns is below this glass dome right behind me. And if you lived in the city, you may not have access to well water, so they would collect the rainwater or pipe in the water and have them in a series of cisterns. And this is a map from 1877 showing where they had 7 cisterns around this area. And by 1885, they had 27 of them throughout the town. So how did they get all that water? Well, you can see the roofs are all sloped in this picture from 1881. And they would actually collect the rainwater, and the rainwater would go down into the cisterns. And I know the glare's rough, but there's actually a cistern with water running into it even today, if you can see it down in there. So they would bury the cisterns in the ground 8 to 12 feet. They would get water from the roof troughs. They would fill up the cistern, and then they could take water out of it in a number of different ways. Now, this really helped the fire department. So we saw one of these Silsbee fire engines when we went to the fire museum, and you can see they'd be able to take a hose or tap into the cistern, and they'd have water to help fight fires. Not only was this useful for drinking water, but also for putting out fires, which were unfortunately quite common, especially in the late 1800s in a number of these buildings and places. And actually, here's a little information about the burning of Brenham. Speaking of fires, so it says it was a Friday night, September 7th, and the atmosphere in Brenham was downright hostile. During the past year of living under military rule, relentless unrest had grown between the soldiers and residents, and violence had become routine. And the block immediately next to where the courthouse is now was totally burned down. Interesting enough, I didn't realize this. Once the train came in, this really became a boom town, and they had 15,500 residents, which is far more than Houston with 9,000 or Austin with only 4,000. I had no idea. Learned something new today. And apparently, General George Custer came through Brenham with his wife Elizabeth. Here's a picture of them. And she talks about it was a lawless country. Each man, even the boys of 12, went armed. Jayhawkers, bandits, and bushwhackers had everything their own way. They had out their burst of temper when the attack of rage came on. It was a common occurrence to shoot down men here for any offense whatever. It was so easy, if a crime was committed, to slip into Mexico. Interesting. Not really a glowing review for early Brenham. Although I'm not going to go through each of these, but this does talk about after the Civil War, Union troops occupied Brenham, and there was a lot of tension here, and we saw earlier how that led to the burning down of a whole block. If you want to learn more about this history, this Tobin Park here is a great spot. Plus, I was excited to learn about cisterns, something that I know we've used throughout the South, and even in Houston, they have a large cistern you can take tours of. I hope to do one day. Pretty neat to see how they use those and how important they were to early life here and the development of the town. They also have information about the freedom colonies out here. So following the Civil War, when all the enslaved peoples were emancipated and finally freed, which is one of the reasons that Juneteenth is such a big holiday here, June 19th, because the last place that they heard about their freedom was here in Texas. And actually that reading of that freedom was done in Galveston, Texas on June 19th, 1865. A lot of other areas like this area probably didn't hear about it until maybe July or a bit later, maybe late June, until the enslaved people here found out that they were actually free. With that freedom, a number of individuals got together and formed what they called freedom colonies, and they have a whole exhibit on these freedom colonies down one of these alleys. Down this alleyway, just on the other side of the cisterns, actually, they have a whole bunch of panels here talking about the freedom colonies and what life was like for those Americans. And you can work your way through these different stations and learn about how the enslaved people originally freed, how they first tried to work and try to assimilate in the community, but ended up finding safer places by creating their own communities known as freedom colonies. And here's a view of some of those freedom colonies around the area. So Brenham is right there. There's a lot of information on these, and I suggest if you have interest, you can of course look up more information about freedom colonies. I believe there's some good books out there. I believe there's a documentary as well. You'll see that the Texas Historical Commission and the Smithsonian came together to put these together, and I believe they have more information out there on them as well. I found this really fascinating and a part of the history here I didn't really know about. As I stand here on the corner and just pan across, I've got to say, I've gone to a lot of small Texas towns, and Brenham is definitely towards the top of my list of my favorite, from the amazing people I talk to every time I come here, to the history, to the art, to the food. Just simply a great place to come and visit. Here's the Giddings and Giddings. It's at a private firm, Brenham's first bank, found in 1866. Huh. I like the old poles and columns and the architecture. I even love how this town keeps a lot of its even bit of old Western charm. Where you can see they have this Longhorn saloon and steakhouse, and it feels like you could be on the set or be stepping back in time into somewhere different, into the Old West. And it's not Texas either if you don't have a Longhorn somewhere as one of your murals. And every little street you turn down right along the courthouse square, you see really nice architecture, old-timey buildings, and a plethora of restaurants to try, with the backdrop of one of these wonderful buildings with a mural on the other side here called Legends. I want to say thank you all for joining me today, and if you enjoyed this video, you all know what to do by this time. I love hearing from you. I love you subscribing and supporting the channel, and I love you joining me on these adventures to learn right along with me. So with that being said, everybody take care out there, and we'll see you on the next video. Bye.